Hi everyone, it's BritSimon here. So I promised today that after the CEAC data has been released today, I promised to do some videos of analysis on each of the regions. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with Africa tonight, and I'll move through the other regions as quickly as I can over the next few days. So I've been out all day today, and I won't be able to do all of them tonight by any means, but certainly we'll go through Africa. And so hopefully the idea of this video will be to give you some insights into the data as we're seeing it, and somewhat give predictions. Now let me just talk about predictions. Only a fool would try and predict the future, but I'm going to try and do that for you because I understand that that's important to a lot of you. You want predictions. You want to know, are you safe or not? And I think in particular in Africa, that's quite difficult to do because we don't really know how the embassies are going to behave. That's probably the biggest single factor that will affect Africa. We also, whilst we can see the distribution, we can't be too precise about which countries are cut off and at what point. It's a bit early to tell that. We may never know until it's really too late to sort of do anything about it in terms of analysis. But nevertheless, I'd like to sort of explain some of the ways I would look at things, or I am looking at things, so that you can understand, some of what I'm thinking, and you can apply your own thinking to it. Now, what I say on this is not necessarily correct. Okay, let me just say right at the beginning, and I'll try and say it a couple of times in the video. This is just projections. This doesn't mean that it's certainty by any means. Very often, I think people expect too much in terms of projections to be precise. That if I can't be precise about a number, then I'm obviously not smart enough, or whatever other sort of dopey thing you might think of. The reality is, when we're talking about projections, we need to predict the future in terms of what the embassies are doing. We need to try and predict how 30,000 cases will behave, how the people will behave, and whether they're qualified or not, and whether they'll respond or not, and so on and so forth. And it really isn't. I mean, it's just not possible to predict the future in any accurate way, right? So this is, by its very nature, this is completely guesswork, and I don't want anyone to take these numbers and decide to be totally fixated on the numbers as if I can predict accurately what the numbers are or what the numbers will be because I've been doing this 10 years. I can't. Nobody can. The future hasn't happened yet, right? So it is unrealistic to expect that these predictions can be 100% accurate. And if anybody tells you that they know how to make an accurate prediction, etc., they're bullshitting, and lying, etc. Right? Nobody knows more about this program than I do, frankly. And I'm telling you that projections and predictions are inaccurate. Okay, so if somebody else tells you contrary to that, I suspect they don't know what they're talking about. Okay, so with all of that being said, let's talk about a few things with regard to the Africa data. Okay, let's put me in the screen here. Let's make this a little bit bigger. A few basic sort of data points that we need to consider, right? In DV 2023, there were 49,000 selectees, just over. There's been a 12% increase, so there's 55,000 selectees for DV 2024. In DV2023, there were 29,335 cases. And in DV2024, there are 33,143. Okay, so about 4,000 additional cases have been added, and there's not really much justification for that, right? The number of cases didn't need to increase at all. DV 2023 saw Africa going current at 63,502. It went current, and that was all 29,335 cases were current, but only 15,461 of those cases were scheduled for interview, and many of those interviews were cancelled in the final month. Okay, so there were people who were scheduled for interview that didn't get current. So in reality, we need to consider why there are double the number of cases than are actually needed, right? And the reality is many of them should not get their interviews. It's just the way it is. And the highest case numbers should be the ones that miss out, right? Okay, so if we start looking at some of the projections here, what I'm considering is that DV 2023 had 15,461 cases that were scheduled, and we know that from the CEAC data in DV 2023, right? This is for Africa only. Now, in order to get 15,461 cases, those cases have to have responded, filled in their DS260 and been processed, etc. And in many cases, probably around about 10% of the cases, people don't even respond. They don't even take up their initial chance and fill in the DS260. I've always called those sort of cases non-responses. And I'm going to say for Africa that we're going to have a 10% non-response rate, which is a pretty conservative rate. Could be a little bit higher than that, could be closer to 15%. But I'm just going to assume that we're going to have a 10% non-response rate, right? Now, in that case, in order to get the 15,461 interviews that we saw in DV 2023, we would need 17,007 cases, right? 17,000 cases. Now, where does that fall? Well, if we look at the data, let's have a look at the data. So what we can do is we can look at the data here and we can figure out, okay, how many cases fall, what case number has 17,000 cases, right? And if we do that, what we find is, and by the way, as you want to look at this data, let me just show you a couple of things about the data very, very quickly. Let me just talk about that. When you have a look at this data, you need to take out the holes, right? Most of you know about holes, you know what they are. And the holes can be very easily identified in the CEAC data. If you download the files, you'll see that if the status is none, then that is a hole, okay? So what I do is I just immediately filter those out so that I can say, okay, well, how many cases are real actual cases? You can see that in the first 10 numbers, for example, case number 1 is a real case and is issued, funnily enough. Number 9 and number 10 are real cases. So in the first 10 cases, only three cases are real. If we look at the first, let's say the first 100 cases, we can see that we've got 37 cases in the first 100. Let's do a couple more of those. We'll do slightly bigger numbers. Let's say the first 2,000 case numbers. We'll have a quick look there. Right. If I go down to case number 2,000, so that's the first 2,000 case numbers. There's 789. So what's that? About 38%, right? So we can see that the number of actual cases in even the first few thousand case numbers is pretty low, below 40%, which is that's data that I've shown on the other sheet there, right? Okay, so now if we want to get down to 17,000 cases, I can tell you I looked at the data a few minutes ago, and I think let's go back to my other sheet here. What I figured out was that the case number for 17,000 cases is 45,127. All right, so that's a very, very, very conservative, and I wouldn't even use it, a very conservative sort of projection, if you like, that says which numbers are safe. Everything below 45,000. But that makes some almost ridiculous assumptions. That assumes that every embassy is going to behave well, and we clearly know they won't. And so we have to add in some case numbers in order to figure out, how many cases we'll really need, right? Now, I should also explain that I've taken account of the unused quota that was in DV2023, and I've taken account of cancelled interviews. One factor increases the number, the other decreases the number. So I've just sort of wiped each other of those out. I've put one against the other. And when I'm talking about unused quota, I'm talking about that because in DV 2023, Africa did not use all of its quota. And in fact, other regions were able to take visas from the Africa region because Africa didn't use its quota. Well, that, in a sense, would justify increasing the number from the 15,461, which is why I'm saying add. But on the other hand, of the 15,461 cases scheduled, we know that at least 1,000 had their interviews cancelled in the month of September, right? So that goes back down. So, one factor goes up, the other factor goes down, and I just wipe them both out. So let's talk about the bad embassies. There will be some bad embassies, and I want to switch to showing the embassies and what I mean by bad embassies in a moment. But I think we could conservatively say that we will have at least 3,000 cases which will suffer because the embassies are doing a bad job, right? And in that case, then this number of 45,000 increases to 55,000 by saying, let's assume that of the 17,000 cases, maybe we need to add in another 3,000 cases to account for the fact that the embassies are going to do a bad job, right? And so if we take that 55,000, that actually is my idea of the lowest safe case number. Everything below 55,000 should be pretty much safe, with the exception of any, if there is a country that was limited in some way, right? So 55,000 is my bottom line number. However, I think we could probably safely add in another 3,000 cases, and that would give us a high safe number of 65,700, right? And again, it's by sort of taking that data, and if you want to play along, if you want to have a look at the file, you would add 3,000 to 3,000, 6,000, and assume 6,000 on top of the 17,000 there. So we're looking at around about 23,000 cases that would need to go current in order to fill the quota. So my range tends to suggest that cases starting at around about 60,000, maybe 65,000, will start to have risk, right? Could be as low as the upper 50s, but probably by the time we get to 60 or 65,000, we're starting to talk about risk of not going current at all, right? And it really depends on the embassy performance, as I mentioned. But what I've had to do is assume, have a look at the embassy performance and assume, look, is there any embassies that are really big, important embassies that are performing very badly, and there are a couple of examples of like that. And also, are there any big embassies which performed badly last year but now seem to be performing well? And there is one very significant example of that, right? So let's have a look at the embassies. Let's have a look at that data. So if we go back here and we look at the to-date number of interviews for each consulate for Africa region state cases, right? And that's what I've plotted into this chart, this pivot chart here. Let me just make that a little bit bigger for you so that you can see this. And I'm going to scroll down this data so you can see, and we can discuss some of the embassies that should be doing better, or the ones that are actually doing pretty well. Okay, so let's pick out some of these embassies. First one on my list I want to talk about is Accra. Now, bearing in mind that we've had 5 months, this data includes interviews scheduled up until the end of February. So 5 months of interviews. After 5 months of interviews being scheduled, Accra has got 60 cases scheduled. That's very bad, right? It's pretty pathetic. I know they did pretty much nothing in October. Then they issued some cases in November. But honestly, it's very clear that Accra, at least up until the end of February, has not given enough prioritization to DV cases. Will they continue to misbehave like that? I don't know, right? But maybe they'll have a sudden change of heart and suddenly start taking a lot of cases. Maybe they won't. I don't know. This is part of the problem in doing predictions. But I can tell you that at their current pace, they would only interview maybe, a couple of hundred cases in the whole year. Well, that clearly isn't enough to satisfy people in Ghana. So if you're at Ghana right now, you should be thinking about, how you should, what you should do about your case. You should really already be thinking about moving to another country if you can. And that isn't done, as I've mentioned before, that isn't done by emailing KCC and asking them to switch the embassies, because they will simply say no. If you want to change your embassy, then really you have to move to another country and then ask KCT to unlock your DS260, make a change on that DS260, updating your address, and then later, a week or two later, you can email KCC and ask them to schedule your case at your new country, the embassy in your new country of residence, right? Now, clearly, what I'm talking about is not for everybody, not possible for everyone to just drop everything and move to another country. I get that. I understand that. It may not be possible because of work. It may not be possible because you can't afford it. It may not be possible because you can't get access to that other country. But I'm saying that unless you do that, and if you get stuck at Accra Embassy or one of these badly performing embassies, you will lose your chance of a green card, which is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So before you say you can't do it, weigh that up against losing a green card, right? And see then whether you really can't consider a move to another country, okay? Okay, so that's Accra. Talked about Accra, right? Next one is Addis Ababa. 59, same comments, 59 interviews so far in 5 months, absolutely pathetic. They actually have more people assigned to them than Accra, right? So they should have done far more than that. And clearly Addis again look like they're set to disappoint thousands of people. And there's nothing we can do apparently to fix this problem of bad behaving embassies. So Addis is also on my list of bad performers. Algeria is doing okay. I expected to see higher numbers from Algeria, funnily enough. I'm not saying by any means that I'm concerned that Algeria is not performing well or is a bad embassy. I'm not saying that. I have no doubt after watching them in the last 2 years that they will do an amazing job of scheduling everyone. But I just thought they would have a little bit of a higher number at this point. As we scroll down, the next bad embassy is Cairo. Cairo at 319 cases scheduled so far, bearing in mind they have got well over 11,000 people that are assigned to that embassy, well over 11,000, right? So all the Egyptians and all of the Sudanese, plus pretty much, people from more or less every other country who happen to live in Egypt or in Cairo, because it's such a big, important city, right? And so 319 cases is an underperformance of what should be, a very busy embassy, right? So that's worrying. That's probably the biggest single worry in the whole African region is the performance of Cairo. Okay. Casablanca at 756, really good performance there. That's clearly good. Dakar at 175, that's not bad. I'm not worried about that. Perhaps could be a little bit better. Djibouti, maybe that should be a little bit better, but again, I'm not particularly worried about those embassies. Let's see, Lomo. Here we go. This is the biggie. This is the big, pleasant surprise for me. Nairobi embassy for the last couple of years has been really, pretty bad. As bad as Addis Ababa, as bad as Cairo, as bad as Accra, and so on. But to see them being the #1 scheduling embassy in Africa, with more African cases than any other embassy, is very pleasing, right? Now they serve a number of countries, so it's not just the the locals that need to be scheduled there, but there's some neighboring countries that use Nairobi as their home embassy, and so quite rightly they should be operating at a high pace, and they are. Right, this is really good news for everyone in Nairobi, of course, or everyone that's assigned to that embassy. But it's also good news, if you want to look at it that way, for Africa as a whole, because that's one of the previously bad performing embassies that is now performing well. And so that's an encouraging sign. If Nairobi can do that, then theoretically Cairo, Addis, the others could do the same. They could increase their performance. But it's just nice to see Nairobi doing well. The other embassy that's doing pretty well is Cameroon embassy. Great to see them at 562. That's a really strong performance from Cameroon. And so, pleased to see that as well. Now, there are no other embassies that I look at as being extremely problematic or worthy of note within the African region, right? It's mainly a story of those embassies I just talked about. How is Accra, Addis, Cairo, how are they going to perform, right? Those are the big three. Between those three embassies, though, we're talking 17,000, 18,000 people out of the 55,000, right? So a very significant chunk of people that are affected by those three embassies, if those three embassies decide not to work very well. And quite simply, what does it mean for those 17 or 18,000 people? It means that their chances are going to be extremely limited. It'll be very, very hard for them. KCC don't want to move people from one embassy to another. And so there will be people whose chances will die because those embassies choose not to do the work. Okay, that's horrific, but that's what it is. Okay, so so far after 5 months, there's been 4,900 interviews scheduled. That's not great in 5 months, in a sense. If it was just a sort of a normal 5 months. But remember, we always expect this. For the first 3 months of the year, we expect a pretty quiet performance. And it doesn't, that number doesn't worry me. In fact, it's larger than this point in DV 2023. So I'm not concerned about that. What I expect to see in the next 2 or 3 months is quite an increase on a monthly basis, where Africa will probably see 1,500 to 2,000 interviews being scheduled each month, and that will continue in. We'll probably see an uptick in March, April, May, and June, perhaps, and we'll see the majority of the work done within those few months. So March, April, May, June, those are the key months to watch. And we could easily see, 8,000 interviews or cases rather being interviewed, which is about 16,000 people in those 4 or 5 months period. So that would be that would bring us to the 15,000 or so interviews that we need to see overall. So there's plenty of capacity to schedule those interviews, and you can see the performance of it. It wouldn't take very much for these embassies to actually increase their performance a little bit, and we will see that, right? So Africa as a whole, then, how's it looking? It's looking pretty scary if you've got a case number of 70,000 and above, 70, 80, 90,000. Those cases, those case numbers are very, very scary. Anything above 80, 90,000, you are pretty much hoping for a miracle at this point. And it's very unlikely that we're going to see cases at the 120,000 range being scheduled for interview. Very unlikely. That would take more bad performing embassies. If there were more bad performing embassies, that screws up the chances of more people below your case number if you've got a very high case number, and therefore can open up the chances for you in your embassy. But because Nairobi is working better, and because people are a little bit smarter about moving now and moving to some of these quieter embassies, I think it's unlikely that we'll see many thousands of people lose their chance at lower case numbers, and therefore, it's unlikely that we see the region go to a very high case number. I can't see Africa going current. I don't think that will happen. And we could see a cutoff as early as about 60,000, right? Give or take a little bit, as early as that, right? So, everything above that point really is a worrying case number, right? Nothing is safe around, from 60,000 on up, right? Under 60,000, yeah, you're more safe. Under 50,000, you can feel fairly confident. But I don't want to hear about people with case number 28,000 and am I safe? That's kind of ridiculous, because we're already current to 26,500 right now. So asking me about case number 28,000 and whether you're safe or not is just frankly a waste of my time. Use some common sense, right? But it wouldn't be a shock at all if we don't see numbers going much above 60,000. Now, could I be wrong? Absolutely, 100%. I could be wrong. Could we see something sort of wildly different to this? Yes, of course. This is just a prediction. I'm certainly not perfect. I certainly can't read the future, unfortunately. I've tried, but I can't do that. And so whilst I'm using a little bit of experience and common sense, and I hope you understand my method here, I have to say I'm not 100% confident in these projections, right? So, be a little bit careful. I don't want you, for example, if your case number 71,000 or something, I don't want you to just give up, right? Because that would be kind of foolish. Even though I've said that your case number is probably risky, it would be foolish to just give up. You're obviously going to wait and see what happens. And the more time that goes on, the more we will know, right? Because as I say, we don't know whether these embassies are going to start performing better or not. We could see some localized problems in some of these very important embassies that could change things tremendously. We could see more health pandemics, that sort of thing. There's various things that could happen that could change this picture. So none of you really can afford to just say, oh, I'm going to give up. It's just not worth even listening or thinking about this. But on the other hand, if you've got anything from case number 60,000 and above, you need to understand that you've got some risk of never becoming current, and therefore you've got to have a mental attitude that just says, look, I'm going to put it in the hands of whatever figure, mythical figure, or whatever you want to believe in. If you believe that God will look after you, then great, your God will look after you, and hopefully that will work out for you. So you can feel free to be as optimistic as you like. Right? I just want you to be informed with the information that says, look, you've got some risk here, so that later on, 6 months down the road, you understand what's happened to you, and you're not horribly surprised come June and July when you have the carpet pulled out from under you, right? I don't want you to be surprised like that. I want you to be informed. So watch the Visa Bulletin. Keep in touch with my channel and watch what happens. Let's see how things progress over the next few months. But as I say, certainly none of you should be ever, not even at low case numbers, none of you should be giving up your job, selling your car, selling your house. None of you should be doing that until you've got the visa in your hands. It's never certain until then, right? And hopefully you understand what is meant by some of this risk. Risk isn't certainty, it's just a possibility of something going wrong, right? Okay, so I hope that's useful to you. I'm going to be doing similar videos on the other regions over the next couple of days, as I mentioned at the beginning. But there are many of you, 55,000 of you, of course, that are interested in Africa. So this one was probably the largest region, probably the most complex in a sense to try and predict what will happen, and is the largest quota also at about 24,000. For many reasons, it was this region I was always going to start with to try and explain what's going to go on. Okay, I think that's covered everything I wanted to cover with you tonight. Hope that's useful. Whether I've given you comforting news or not, please give me a thumbs up on the video. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and let's see how things go, and let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's hope for the best, and just hope everything moves as well as we can possibly imagine. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining in. All right. Good night. Bye-bye.